The signal arrived on a frequency that had been dead for 270,000 years, and Maren Solveig nearly spilled her tea when the console screamed. She was 3 hours into a night rotation at the Vantage Array, the deep listening station built into the granite spine of what the old maps called the Carpathian Ridge. The array's 48 receiver dishes pointed outward through gaps in the planetary shield lattice, each one tuned to a different band of the electromagnetic spectrum, each one monitored by algorithms that had not triggered a genuine alert in Maren's 11 years of service. The dishes listened. The algorithms filtered. And the silence of deep space continued, as it had continued for generations beyond counting, since the last known alien civilization had retreated from the galactic arm and left humanity alone with its patience and its preparations. The alert was not a drill. She confirmed that within 4 seconds. The signature matched nothing in the contact library, which contained over 900,000 cataloged emission profiles spanning 200 millennia of observation. Whatever was broadcasting on that dead frequency was either something entirely new or something so old that its profile had been archived and forgotten. Maren pulled the signal apart with steady hands. She was a signals analyst, third-generation Vantage staff, trained from childhood in the particular discipline of listening to a universe that rarely spoke. Her grandmother had served the array. Her mother had served the array. Neither of them had ever heard anything like this. The frequency was a navigational beacon format. Old. Impossibly old. The modulation pattern used a compression algorithm that the historical database dated to the pre-silence era, over 270,000 years ago, when the species known in the deep archives as the Korath Dominion had maintained a network of transit beacons across the intergalactic arm. Those beacons had gone dark 250,000 years before Maren was born. The Korath themselves had vanished from every sensor sweep, every long-range survey, every probe dispatch. Their worlds were empty. Their stations were dust. Their fleets were legends used to frighten children in the early centuries of humanity's expansion into orbital space. And now one of their beacons was transmitting again. Maren opened the priority channel. Vantage Array to Continuity Watch. I have a live contact on a Korathera navigational frequency, bearing 271 by positive 18, range indeterminate. Signal is active, modulated, and consistent with a transit beacon reactivation. This is not a drill. The response came in 11 seconds, not from Continuity Watch, from the Warden herself. Vantage, this is Warden Kali's den. Confirmed signal origin is Korathera. Confirmed. Compression algorithm matches archived Korath navigational protocol, last active approximately 270,000 years before present. 3 seconds of silence. Then, Array is now under strategic authority. All data feeds to the Terran Continuity Defense Council in real time. Hold your position, Analyst Solveig. You are the first ear. I want you to stay the first ear. Maren stayed. She did not sleep for the next 31 hours. During the first 8 hours, the signal remained a single navigational pulse, steady and unchanging. Maren cross-referenced its characteristics against every entry in the Deep Archives pre-silence catalog and confirmed the match with increasing certainty. Korath Transit Beacon. Standard military grade. Designed to activate when an approaching fleet entered a predetermined range of the exit coordinates, like a lighthouse recognizing a ship by its engine signature and lighting itself to guide it home. During the 9th hour, the signal split. What had been a single pulse became 2, then 4, then 8, each sub-signal on a slightly different frequency, each carrying a different data payload. Maren mapped the cascade in real time, her fingers moving across the console with the focused precision of a musician reading a score she had never seen before but understood instinctively. The sub-signals were fleet telemetry. Individual ship identifiers, broadcast by the approaching vessels as they decelerated through the transit corridor. Each identifier carried a registration code, a crew count stamp, and a power status flag. The power status flags were all amber, not green, which would indicate full operational capacity, not red, which would indicate critical failure. Amber, minimal functionality, conservation mode. Ships running on the last of their reserves, burning only what they needed to maintain structural integrity and life support. The crew counts were small, devastatingly small, ships designed for thousands carrying hundreds, some carrying dozens. By the 22nd hour, Marin had resolved the full fleet manifest from the telemetry stream. 61 vessels, 14,217 individuals, the entire surviving population of a species that had once governed 47 star systems. The Korath were coming back, and they were coming back with nothing. The briefing convened in the deep chamber beneath the continuity spire, the governmental seat that rose from the center of the city once called Meridian and now simply called the capital. Marin had been brought by suborbital shuttle, arriving with her raw data still scrolling on the portable terminal strapped to her forearm. She had never been inside the spire. She had never met a warden. She had certainly never stood in a room where the individuals who governed 8 billion people and a planetary defense grid, spanning from the surface to the outer system, sat waiting for her to explain what she had heard. Warden Calais Den occupied the central chair, tall, silver-haired, composed. Beside her, Fleet Coordinator Ren Vasic, who commanded the orbital defense platforms and the deep space interdiction fleet. Beside him, Archive Custodian Liel Dren, whose knowledge of pre-silence alien civilizations was unmatched on Earth. Around the curved table, 12 council members representing the continental governing bodies. Analyst Solveig, the warden said, "Report." Marin stood at the projection console and laid out the signal data with the clinical precision her training demanded, even as her pulse hammered in her throat. The signal originated from a point approximately 4 light-years beyond the system perimeter, in the direction of the old Korath transit corridor. It began as a single navigational beacon pulse on a frequency that has been dormant for 270,000 years. Over the following 6 hours, the signal expanded into a full transit approach sequence, which I have cross-referenced against the Korath navigational protocols preserved in the deep archive. She pulled up the comparison. 2 waveforms side by side, one from the archive, recorded by humanity's first deep space listening stations over 100,000 years ago from residual echoes trapped in the heliopause, one from last night. The match is 97%. The 3% variance is consistent with equipment degradation over deep time. This is not a new signal. This is an old system being reactivated. Archive Custodian Dren leaned forward. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades studying dead civilizations. A transit approach sequence implies a fleet in compressed transit, decelerating toward a predetermined exit point. The Korath used fixed-point emergence. Their transit corridors terminated at specific coordinates, marked by beacon networks. If the beacons are reactivating, it means vessels are approaching those coordinates. "How many vessels?" Fleet Coordinator Vasic asked. "The signal structure suggests a fleet beacon, not a single-ship ping," Marin said. Based on the bandwidth allocation, the Korath protocol reserved this tier for formations of 50 or more vessels. Silence in the chamber, 50 vessels. Emerging from a transit corridor that had been dead for 250,000 years. From a species that every scholar on Earth had declared extinct. The warden spoke into the silence. "Archive Custodian, in your professional assessment, why would the Korath return now?" Dren folded her hands. They would not. The Korath Dominion collapsed 270,000 years ago. Every indicator suggests total civilizational failure, an overstretched empire that could not sustain its own logistics network. Their worlds are barren. Their stations are rubble. They should not exist. She paused. But the signal exists, so either the Korath survived in some form we never detected, or something else is using their infrastructure. Which is worse? Vasek asked. Both are manageable, the warden said. Because we are ready for both. Coordinator Vasek, activate the outer system interdiction grid. Bring the 6th and 9th orbital platforms to full readiness. I want a contact delegation assembled and a diplomatic channel prepared. And I want analyst Solveig on the delegation. Marin blinked. Warden. You heard them first. You will see them first. That symmetry matters. Vasek brought the defense network online in stages while the delegation assembled. Marin watched the feeds from the Spire's tactical display as the system woke around them. The 6th platform's weapons arrays rotated from standby to active tracking, each battery acknowledging readiness in sequence. The 9th platform powered its interdiction field generators, the ones capable of disrupting compressed transit emergence within a sphere of 200,000 kilometers. Deep space sensor buoys along the Korath transit corridor shifted to high-resolution scanning mode, painting the incoming signal source with frequencies designed to resolve individual hull signatures at interstellar range. The data that came back made Vasek sit down heavily. 61 vessels, he said. Confirmed. Hull compositions consistent with Korath-era construction alloys but heavily modified. These ships have been repaired dozens, possibly hundreds of times. I am reading at least 7 distinct alloy types in the patchwork. Some of these patches are newer than others by thousands of years. They have been flying continuously, Dren said, for a very long time. Power signatures, the warden asked. Minimal. These ships are running on reserves. Energy output for the entire fleet is less than what a single one of our orbital platforms generates on standby. Vasek paused. They are not a threat. Tactically, 61 vessels in this condition could not penetrate our outer sensor perimeter, let alone challenge the interdiction grid. Their weapons, if they still function, are 270,000 years out of date. Good, the warden said. Then we meet them as guests, not targets. While the defense network activated, Marin reviewed the Deep Archives Korath files on her personal terminal. She had studied them in Academy, the way every signals analyst studied the pre-silence civilizations, as historical context for the silence they now monitored. But reading them now, with an active Korath signal pulsing on her console, the files felt different. Less like history, more like a warning being fulfilled. The Korath Dominion had been the dominant power in the intergalactic arm for approximately 40,000 years before its collapse. At its peak, it controlled the resource extraction rights to over 190 star systems, governed 47 directly, and maintained a military fleet of 10,000 vessels. Its transit beacon network spanned the arm, a web of navigational waypoints that allowed Korath fleets to move between systems with the efficiency of a rail network. Earth's solar system had been one of those waypoints, a minor node, a place to stop, refuel, and continue onward. The collapse, when it came, had been total. The logistics network that sustained the Empire's outer territories failed first, a cascade of supply chain breakdowns that starved the frontier worlds within decades. The central worlds held longer but could not absorb the refugee fleets from the frontier. Within 3 generations, the Dominion had fragmented into hundreds of independent survival groups, each competing for the remaining resources, each cannibalizing the infrastructure that had once held them together. Within 10 generations, the Korath were gone from every system the Archive had surveyed. Or so humanity had believed for 150,000 years. The delegation assembled aboard the diplomatic cruiser Hearthstone, which departed from the orbital platform designated Sentinel-4 on a trajectory that would intercept the projected emergence point of the incoming fleet. The Hearthstone was not a warship. It carried no offensive armament beyond standard point defense arrays. What it carried was a communications suite capable of translating any known language in the galactic archive. a medical bay configured for xenobiological first contact, and a hull plating designed to survive close proximity to a compressed transit emergence event. Marin stood at the observation gallery as the Hearthstone cleared the inner defense perimeter and accelerated outward. Behind them, Earth filled the viewport, and she allowed herself a moment to look. She had seen it from orbit before. Every citizen of the continuity had that opportunity at least once in their lives, a passage through the orbital layer as part of the education cycle, so that every human being could see what their species had built and understand what they were maintaining. But this time, she looked with different eyes. She looked at the defense platforms, the ones visible as bright points arranged in concentric shells around the planet, each one a city-sized installation bristling with sensor arrays and interdiction batteries. She looked at the fleet anchorages, where the dark shapes of warships held station in disciplined formations, their hulls catching sunlight along angular edges. She looked at the atmospheric shield generators, the ones embedded in the upper mesosphere, invisible from the surface but visible from orbit as a faint amber shimmer that wrapped the planet like a second skin. And below all of that, Earth itself, green continents, blue oceans, white cloud systems moving in patterns that had been stabilized and optimized over 30,000 years of atmospheric management, cities visible as clusters of light along coastlines and river systems, their vertical structures rising to altitudes that required engineered pressure gradients, agricultural zones in continental interiors, precision-managed biomes feeding 8 billion people with zero ecological degradation. Between the cities, managed forests in their original watersheds, rivers running in beds that had not shifted in millennia, mountain ecosystems preserved from the Ice Age recovery period, and maintained with a discipline that bordered on reverence. 270,000 years ago, when the Koreth had last been active, humanity had been chipping stone tools in river valleys. Marin thought about that timeline as the planet receded behind the Hearthstone's engines. She thought about the generations, the thousands upon thousands of generations between a hand axe and a defense grid, between a campfire and an atmospheric shield, between looking at the stars with wonder and filling the space around those stars with the patient, accumulated work of a species that had decided, at some point so deep in its history that the decision felt like instinct, that it would be ready for whatever came from the dark. The Hearthstone reached the projected emergence point 14 hours after departure. Marin was on the bridge when the transit corridor opened. It was not subtle. The Koreth had built their transit system for military logistics, not elegance. A seam in space split along a line 3 kilometers long, hemorrhaging radiation in bands that the Hearthstone's shields absorbed without strain. Through the seam, shapes materialized, hull after hull, emerging from compressed transit with the ponderous momentum of vessels that had been traveling for a very long time. Marin counted them as they appeared: 12, 20, 35, 48, 53. The formation stabilized at 61 vessels. They were enormous by pre-silence standards. The largest, a command vessel judging by the density of its communications arrays, measured approximately 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull was battered, scarred, patched in places with materials that did not match the original construction. It looked old in a way that transcended ordinary wear, the kind of old that meant this vessel had been flying continuously for longer than some civilizations had existed. The fleet held position. No weapons powered, no aggressive posture. They sat in the void like travelers who had arrived at a destination they were no longer sure they recognized. Marin opened the communication channel. The bridge crew watched her hands. She pressed the transmit key. Unidentified fleet, this is the diplomatic vessel Hearthstone, representing the Terran continuity. You have entered sovereign space. Please identify yourselves and state your purpose. The response took 47 seconds. When it came, it was in a language that the translation matrix identified, processed, and rendered into human speech with a delay of less than 2 seconds, because the Korath language had been preserved in the deep archive for over 100,000 years. This is Commander Verk of the Korath Remnant Fleet. We are returning to the system we departed 270,000 years ago. We did not expect anyone to answer. Commander Verk agreed to a face-to-face meeting aboard the Hearthstone. He arrived in a shuttle that docked with visible difficulty, its docking mechanism struggling to interface with the Hearthstone's modern systems. The shuttle's hull was the same battered composite as the fleet vessels, scarred and repaired so many times that the original surface was barely visible beneath layers of emergency patching. The docking collar required manual override from the Hearthstone's crew, who adapted the connection in real time using interface protocols they had designed for exactly this scenario. For the day, an alien vessel with incompatible technology attempted to dock with a human ship. Verk himself was tall, lean, gray-skinned, with 4 eyes arranged in 2 vertical pairs, and a skeletal structure that suggested a species evolved for low-gravity environments. He wore armor that had been repaired so often it was more patch than plate. The outer layer showed the original Korath design, interlocking ceramic scales in a pattern that the Deep Archive's xenoarchaeologists had studied from fragments found on dead Korath worlds. But beneath the ceramic, layers of replacement material were visible at every joint and seam, alloys from a dozen different sources, some forged in conditions that had clearly been desperate. Behind him, 2 officers in similar condition. All 3 moved with the careful deliberation of people who had not stood on stable ground in a very long time. Marin stood beside Warden Den in the Hearthstone's reception chamber. The room had been configured for diplomatic contact, a table, neutral lighting, the Terran continuity's seal on the wall behind the human delegation. Marin noticed Verk's 4 eyes tracking everything, the lighting, the wall panels, the seal, the uniforms, the faces. He looked like someone trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he had expected. What he said first was not a greeting, not a demand, not a challenge. It was a question. "What are you?" The warden answered, "We are human, the native species of the 3rd planet in this system." Verk's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, top pair first, then bottom. "That is not possible. When we left this system, the 3rd planet supported a pre-agricultural primate population, scattered bands, no permanent structures, no technology. We classified the species as negligible." "That was 270,000 years ago," the warden said. "Yes, we know the duration. We have tracked every year." Verk's voice carried an exhaustion that seemed older than the wear on his armor. "We did not expect the species to survive. The planet was catalogued as a minor resource waypoint, a place to refuel and resupply if our fleet ever returned to this sector. We did not expect anyone to be here." "And yet here we are," the warden said, "with rather more than permanent structures." "Where have you been?" Marin asked. She had not planned to speak. The question came out of the part of her that had spent 11 years listening to silence and now, for the first time, was hearing an answer. Verk turned his 4 eyes to her. "Everywhere else, and then nowhere. We have been in transit for the last 12,000 years. Continuous transit, no fixed port, no homeworld, no territory. Before that, we occupied a series of temporary systems in the outer arm, moving when resources depleted or when the local conditions became untenable. Before that, we were an empire. The Korath Dominion, 47 systems under unified governance. We collapsed 270,000 years ago when our logistics network failed and our outer territories fragmented. The central world starved. The fleet scattered. Most of the Dominion perished within 3 generations of the collapse." He paused. The 2 officers behind him stood very still. "We are what is left, 61 ships, 14,000 individuals. We have no homeworld. We have no territory. We have been moving for 12,000 years looking for a system that could sustain us. Every system we have found has been either uninhabitable, contested, or stripped of the resources we need. Another pause. We remembered this system. We remembered the transit beacon we left here. We came back because we had nowhere else to go. The chamber was quiet. Marin looked at Verk and saw something she recognized, not from any diplomatic training or signals analysis, but from the deep human understanding of what it meant to be tired. Verk was not threatening. He was not posturing. He was not even asking. He was standing in a room full of beings his species had dismissed as animals 250,000 years ago, and he was too exhausted to do anything but tell the truth. The warden let the silence hold for exactly the right duration. Then she spoke. "Commander Verk, your fleet is in no immediate danger. We are not going to fire on you. We are not going to turn you away. But I need you to understand what you have returned to, because the system you remember does not exist anymore." She turned to Marin. "Analyst Solveig, show them." Marin activated the projection system. The reception chamber's walls dissolved into a panoramic display, and the data she had prepared during the transit from Earth filled the space around them like a window opening onto everything humanity had become. She started with the planet. Earth as seen from high orbit, rotating slowly, the defense platforms visible as bright points in their concentric shells, the fleet anchorages as dark clusters, the atmospheric shield as a faint amber band at the mesosphere boundary. Below the shield, the continents, green and ordered and alive. Verk's 4 eyes widened, all 4 simultaneously. "This is Earth," Marin said, "the 3rd planet, your former waypoint." She zoomed in. The capital came into view first, its spire rising from the center of a city that sprawled along a river delta, towers catching sunlight in engineered patterns. She rotated the view southward, showing the coastal megastructure that housed the deep archive, then northward to the mountain installations that anchored the continental shield array, then eastward across an agricultural biome that stretched to the horizon in precision-managed rows. Current population, 8 billion. Unified governance under the Terran continuity, established 140,000 years ago. Planetary infrastructure includes atmospheric management, seismic stabilization, oceanic current regulation, and a biosphere preservation network spanning every continent. We manage the planet's climate, geology, and ecology at systemic level. She moved the view upward, through the atmospheric shield, into the orbital layer. Defense infrastructure, 12-tier system, orbital through atmospheric to ground-based. 9 tiers are visible to incoming vessels. 3 are classified. The orbital layer contains 8,400 combat-ready warships, 212 sensor platforms, and 47 fleet anchorages. Deep space interdiction capability extends to the system perimeter. We detected your transit approach at a distance of 4 light years. Verk had not moved. His 2 officers had taken an involuntary step backward. One of them placed a hand on the table edge, as if steadying himself against the weight of the numbers. Energy production. Planetary output exceeds your archived Dominionera classification scale. We operate fusion plants, geothermal taps, orbital solar collection arrays, and 3 experimental energy systems that have no analog in any civilization we have encountered or studied. Total output is allocated as follows: 4% military, 11% infrastructure maintenance, 23% research, 18% ecological management, 15% education, and 29% cultural preservation and civilian services. She paused to let the numbers settle. 4% military. The most formidable defense grid Verk had ever seen, built on 4% of a civilization's energy budget. The rest went to keeping the planet alive, keeping the species educated, keeping the culture intact. Marin had grown up with those numbers. She knew them the way she knew her own heartbeat, but watching Verk absorb them, she saw them fresh. "You built all of this," Verk said. His voice had changed. The exhaustion was still there, but something else had joined it, something closer to vertigo. In 270,000 years. Yes. From stone tools. Yes. Verk looked at the projection. The planet turned slowly, its defense platforms catching light, its cities glowing along coastlines, its oceans shimmering under managed cloud cover. He looked at it for a long time. We classified you as negligible, he said. Pre-agricultural primates, no permanent structures, threat assessment, 0. We entered it into our survey database and moved on to the next system. We did not think about you again for over 250,000 years. We thought about you, Marin said. Verk turned to her. What do you mean? We found your beacon, the one you left in our outer system when you departed. It took our ancestors a long time to reach it, longer still to decode it. But they did. They learned your language, your navigational protocols, your survey classification system. They read everything you had recorded about us, including the resource extraction plan, including the classification, negligible. She pulled up the archive record. The original Koreth survey file, translated into human script, preserved under glass in the deep archive for over 160,000 years. She displayed it on the projection wall, the Koreth glyphs glowing beside the human translation. Third planet Sol system, dominant species, bipedal primates, pre-agricultural. Population estimate 12,000, technology, lithic tools, classification, negligible. Resource value, moderate lithium deposits, 3 primary locations. Recommendation, waypoint designation, deferred extraction. Verk read his own species' words in silence. One of his officers made a sound that might have been an intake of breath, or something like a groan swallowed before it could form. Deferred extraction, Verk repeated. Your survey recommended that our planet's mineral resources be extracted at a future date, when logistically convenient. Our ancestors read that recommendation. They understood what it meant, and they spent the next 250,000 years making certain that when someone came to collect, they would find something other than a waypoint. Marin let the projection shift. The defense grid lit up, tier by tier, spreading outward from the planet's surface through the atmosphere into orbit and beyond. Each tier illuminated in sequence, a cascade of preparation that spanned the entire system. The lithium deposits your survey identified are still in the crust, she said. We never mined them. We built our most important infrastructure on top of them. The capital sits above the largest deposit. The deep archive sits above the second. The continental shield anchor sits above the third. Not because we needed to protect the lithium, but because we wanted whoever came back to understand that the resources they had planned to extract were now the foundations of a civilization they could not move. Verk sat down. He did not ask permission. He simply sat as though his legs had decided independently that standing was no longer sustainable. You knew we would come back, he said. We knew someone would. Your beacon said so. Your survey said so. The classification, the deferred extraction order, the waypoint designation. It all said the same thing. We are not important enough to deal with now, but eventually someone will come to take what is ours. Our ancestors decided that when that day came, taking would not be an option. The warden stepped forward. Commander Verk, we did not prepare for 250,000 years out of fear. We prepared because preparation is what we do. It is the defining characteristic of our species. We see a problem that may arrive in 1,000 years and we begin solving it immediately. We see a threat that may never materialize and we build the answer anyway. Not because we are aggressive, because we remember. Verk looked up at her. Remember what? That we were once classified as negligible. That a survey team measured our world's resources when we were still learning to shape stone and decided we were not worth the effort of destroying. That decision was made for us about us, without our knowledge or consent. We found out about it thousands of years later, and we have never stopped remembering." She paused. "That memory is the foundation of everything you see, every warship, every defense platform, every atmospheric shield, every generation that inherited the knowledge and passed it forward. We remember being dismissed, we remember being deferred, and we made certain that no one would ever defer us again." After the initial meeting, the warden offered Verk a tour of what he had returned to. Not a military installation, the planet itself. He accepted with the quiet nod of someone who understood that what he was about to see would change him and had decided to let it. They descended from the hearthstone in a diplomatic shuttle, passing through the outer orbital layer. Verk pressed his face to the viewport as the first defense platform came into range, close enough to see the individual sensor dishes and weapons emplacements that covered its surface like the scales of an animal too large to comprehend from a single vantage point. "How large is that station?" he asked. 12 kilometers across," Marin said. "It is one of our smaller installations." Verk said nothing. He watched the platform slide past, its hull catching sunlight along edges that gleamed with the particular polish of materials engineered for longevity rather than aesthetics. Behind it, another platform. Behind that, another. The concentric shells of the defense grid resolved from abstract data points into physical objects, each one massive, each one operational, each one part of a system that wrapped the planet in layers of readiness so deep that the innermost tier was invisible from space. They passed a fleet anchorage, human warships in formation, holding station with the motionless discipline of vessels that had been built to wait and were very good at it. Each ship was angular, dark-hulled, 3 to 4 kilometers long. Weapons arrays ran the length of their dorsal ridges. Amber light pulsed along their spines, a power signature that the Hearthstone's tactical systems identified as combat-ready idle, engines warm, weapons charged, targeting systems calibrated and waiting. Verk counted 8 ships in the formation. Marin knew there were over 1,000 more beyond visual range, distributed across 47 anchorages that ringed the planet in overlapping fields of coverage. She did not tell him the number. He would learn it in time. For now, 8 was enough. "Your weapons," Verk said. "I do not recognize the energy profiles." "You would not. They are based on principles our physicists developed approximately 60,000 years ago. Your Dominion-era weapons used directed plasma containment. Ours use something different." "What?" "That is one of the 3 classified tiers. I can tell you that they work, and that we have never had to fire them in anger." Verk absorbed this. "You have never been attacked." "We have been tested. Sensor probes from unknown origins, twice in the last 50,000 years. An automated mining drone fleet that entered the system approximately 12,000 years ago and was interdicted at the outer perimeter. A derelict warship from an unknown civilization that drifted through the system 9,000 years before that. In none of these cases was hostile intent confirmed, and in none of them did we fire first. The probes were tracked and allowed to depart. The mining drones were disabled and disassembled for study. The derelict was towed to a research facility and cataloged. You study everything that comes here. We study everything, period. It is what the curiosity produces. The shuttle descended through the atmospheric shield. Verk flinched as the amber shimmer passed over the viewport, a reflex that Marin understood. To him, it looked like a weapon barrier. To her, it was more like a membrane, permeable to anything the continuity chose to admit, impermeable to anything it did not. Below the shield, the planet opened up. The capital resolved first, its spire catching morning sunlight, the city sprawling outward along the river delta in an interlocking pattern of towers and green corridors. Marin guided the shuttle on a wide orbit, showing Verk the extent of the urban zone, the transit networks linking population centers, the agricultural biome stretching inland toward the mountain ranges. Then she turned southward, following the coastline to the deep archive. It rose from the seaboard like a ridge of engineered stone, its pylons extending into the water, its internal structure visible through transparent sections of the outer wall as floor upon floor of climate-controlled storage. The archive was 12 kilometers long. It housed the accumulated knowledge of every civilization humanity had ever studied, encountered, or found traces of. Over 400 species, over 200 millennia of records, preserved, organized, maintained, waiting. "There is a section for you," Marin said. Verk turned to her. "A section." "The Korath section, 40,000 square meters, built to house everything we know about your civilization and everything we hope to learn. It has been maintained for 150,000 years. You built a section for us before you knew we were alive. We built sections for everyone. The archive contains records of 412 civilizations. Most of them are extinct. We preserve their histories because someone should, because memory matters, because the worst thing that can happen to a species is not extinction, it is being forgotten." Verk looked at the archive as it passed beneath them. His lower pair of eyes were half closed, an expression that Marin could not read but suspected was something close to grief. "We have records," he said, "tens of thousands of years of galactic observation, star charts, civilizational surveys, histories of species you have never encountered. It is all we have left of what we were. Then it belongs in the archive, and we would be honored to receive it." The tour continued for 3 more hours. Marin showed Verk the managed forests that covered the northern continents, the same forests that had existed when his survey teams had cataloged this world, preserved through every stage of human development. She showed him the ocean current regulators, the ones that kept the thermohaline circulation stable and the coastal ecosystems productive. She showed him the seismic stabilization network, a grid of subsurface installations that kept the tectonic plates from generating destructive earthquakes, a technology that had taken humanity 30,000 years to perfect, and that ran so quietly most citizens forgot it existed. At each stop, Verk asked questions, not tactical questions, not questions about capability or threat potential, questions about why. Why preserve the forests when the land could be used for infrastructure? Why stabilize the oceans when the energy could be redirected to military applications? Why spend resources on ecological management when those resources could extend the defense grid? Each time, Marin gave the same answer, phrased differently but carrying the same core. Because this is home, and home is not just a strategic position, it is the reason we prepare. Verk asked to see one more thing before they returned to the Hearthstone. He asked to see the river valleys. Marin took him to the Carpathian lowlands, the area near the vantage array where she had grown up. The shuttle landed on a cleared plateau above a river that had been running in the same bed for longer than human civilization had existed. Below them, the valley stretched green and quiet, the water catching afternoon sunlight, the banks lined with trees that had been growing since before the first human city rose on the delta 300 kilometers to the south. Verk stepped out of the shuttle and stood on the plateau. The wind carried the sound of the river. Birds called from the forest canopy. The air smelled of water and stone and growing things, the unchanged chemistry of a planet that had been allowed to remain itself even as the species that lived on it had built warships and defense grids and atmospheric shields. "This is where your survey team would have walked," Marin said, 270,000 years ago. The terrain has not changed significantly. The river is the same river. The birds are descendants of the species your team would have recorded. The trees are descendants of the same forest. Verk stood very still. His 4 eyes moved across the valley with slow, deliberate attention, as though he were trying to reconcile what he was seeing with the data in a survey file older than most of the stars visible from this latitude. "Your species was here," he said, "in this valley when we came." "Probably. The population distribution models suggest bands of 40 to 60 individuals in valleys like this one, seasonal camps, flint-knapping sites, fire pits. And now you build warships. Yes. And atmospheric shields. Yes. And archives that hold the history of 400 species. 412. 13 of those entries are fragmentary. We are still working on them. Verk looked at her. The wind moved across the plateau, carrying the sound of the river, carrying the sound of birds, carrying the scent of a world that had spent 250,000 years becoming something that could not be dismissed, deferred, or diminished. We had 47 systems, he said. At the height of the Dominion, 47 worlds under our governance, a fleet of over 10,000 vessels. We thought we were the dominant force in this sector of the galaxy. He paused. You have one world, one, and you have surpassed everything we built across 47. Marin did not argue. The statement was not an exaggeration, and they both knew it. Humanity had chosen depth over breadth, concentration over expansion, patience over ambition. One world fully mastered, one species fully committed. The result was a civilization that a 47-system empire could not have matched even at its height, because the empire had spread itself across light years and thinned at every border, while humanity had poured everything into a single point until that point became unbreakable. We could have expanded, she said. We had the technology to colonize neighboring systems for over 100,000 years. We chose not to. Why? Because we were not finished here. Because the planet needed us and we needed it. Because every generation that considered expansion also considered the cost, the logistics chains, the supply vulnerabilities, the border disputes, the slow drift of identity that comes with spreading across light years. And every generation reached the same conclusion. Not yet. Not until Earth is what it should be. And is it what it should be? Marin looked at the valley. The river ran. The birds called. The forest held its ground as it had held it through ice ages and warming periods, and the entire arc of human development from stone tools to orbital platforms. I think Earth is what we decided it would be, she said. A place worth defending, a place worth staying. A home that we built slowly, generation by generation, not because we lacked ambition, but because our ambition was pointed inward instead of outward. Before they returned to the hearthstone, Verk asked one more question. They were standing on the plateau above the river, the shuttle behind them, the valley stretching green and quiet below. The beacon we left, he said, the one in your outer system, when your ancestors decoded it, what else did they find? Marin had been waiting for this question. She had debated whether to offer the information unprompted and decided against it, because some truths were better received when asked for than when delivered. Everything, she said, your navigational charts for this sector, your military communication protocols, your fleet disposition records, your survey classifications for every system you had visited within 50 light years of this one, and your strategic threat assessment matrix, including the criteria by which you determined which species to sterilize and which to leave alive. Verk's 4 eyes closed, all of them, for the first time since she had met him. When they opened, the exhaustion in them had been replaced by something harder, something that looked like accountability. You found the sterilization protocols. We found them, we studied them, we understood them, and we prepared for the possibility that whoever came back to this system might apply them to us. That is why you built the defense grid. That is one of the reasons. The other is that the protocols told us we were not the only species that had ever been classified as negligible. Your records contained references to 17 other worlds where pre-technological species had been identified and deferred. 6 of those worlds were subsequently sterilized when the Dominion returned. Our ancestors read those records and decided that the same fate would not apply to us. Verk stood in the wind for a long time. The river ran below them. The birds called from the canopy. 250,000 years separated the moment his ancestors had left this world and the moment he was standing on it again. And in that gap, the species they had dismissed had read their most classified documents, understood their most ruthless policies, and built a civilization specifically designed to ensure that those policies would never be applied to them. "We deserved this," he said, not with self-pity, with the flat, professional assessment of a commander reviewing a strategic failure. "We wrote the plan for our own obsolescence and left it where our target could find it." "You left it where curious primates could find it," Marin corrected. "That is not the same thing. Leaving a plan where your target can find it assumes the target is already your equal. Leaving it where curious primates can find it assumes they will never develop the capacity to understand it. That assumption was the real failure." Verk looked at her. Then he did something she had not seen any Korath do in the hours since he had boarded the hearthstone. He laughed. It was a dry sound, percussive, filtered through cartilage plates that vibrated with a frequency she felt in her sternum. But it was recognizable. "Negligible," he said again, but this time the word sounded different, less like a classification, more like an epitaph for the certainty that had produced it. The meeting reconvened aboard the hearthstone that evening. The warden offered the Korath remnant fleet provisional sanctuary in the outer system, a designated orbital zone with access to solar energy collection and asteroid belt mining rights sufficient to sustain 14,000 individuals indefinitely. The offer was not charity. It was strategy. A species that had once commanded 47 systems, reduced to 61 battered ships, posed no military threat to the Terran continuity. But it represented something the continuity valued more than security: knowledge. 270,000 years of galactic history stored in the Korath fleet's databanks. Star charts of regions humanity had never reached. Records of civilizations that had risen and fallen in the time between humanity's first campfire and its first orbital platform. Verk accepted with a dignity that Marin had not expected but should have. He did not grovel. He did not plead. He stood, placed his hand flat on the table in what she later learned was a Korath gesture of binding agreement, and said, "We will stay, and we will share everything we have. It is the least we can repay to a species we once dismissed as animals." The warden matched his formality. "Your knowledge will be preserved in the deep archive alongside the records of every other civilization we have studied. Your people will have access to our medical facilities, our engineering resources, and our educational systems. What you build in the sanctuary zone is yours. What you choose to share is yours to give." One of Verk's officers, a younger Korath who had been silent throughout both meetings, spoke for the first time. "You are giving us a home." The warden looked at the officer. "We are giving you a place to stop. Whether it becomes a home is up to you." After the formal session ended, Verk asked if he could see the planet from the observation gallery one more time. The warden granted the request. Marin accompanied him. They stood side by side at the viewport, the Earth turning below them, its defense platforms catching starlight, its cities glowing through gaps in the cloud cover. The hearthstone held station at a high orbit that gave them a view spanning from the Terminator line to the sunlit hemisphere, where the capital's spire was visible as a bright needle rising from the continental shelf. "I have commanded this fleet for 90 years, Verk said. "Before me, 11 other commanders stretching back 12,000 years of continuous transit. We have visited hundreds of systems. We have seen civilizations rise and fall. We have watched empires build and crumble and leave nothing but debris fields. In all of that time, across all of those worlds, I have never seen anything like what you have done here." He turned to Marin. "Negligible, that is what we called you, pre-agricultural primates. 12,000 individuals chipping stone in river valleys." His voice cracked on the last word. Not from grief. From the sheer, crushing weight of having been wrong for 270,000 years. "I would like to understand how," he said. Marin looked at him. Verk, commander of the Korath remnant, last officer of a dead empire, a being who had spent 90 years leading 14,000 exhausted survivors through the void, searching for a place to stop. He had returned to the one system his ancestors had dismissed as unimportant, and found it occupied by a species that had used every year of its absence to become something his entire civilization, at its height, had never achieved. "It starts with the river valleys," she said. "It starts with curiosity. We looked at the sky, and we wondered what was there. And then we spent 250,000 years finding out." She paused. "But the wondering never stopped. That is the part your survey did not measure. You saw pre-agricultural primates with stone tools. You cataloged the population, measured the resources, assessed the threat level, and moved on. You recorded everything that could be counted. You missed the thing that could not. Which was that we never stop. We never stop wondering. We never stop building. We never stop preparing. You called it negligible because you measured it against what it was. You should have measured it against what it would become." Verk's 4 eyes held hers. In them she saw something she had never expected to find in the gaze of an alien commander. Recognition. Not of her personally, of what she represented. Of the quiet, patient, implacable force that had taken a species of stone-tool primates and carried it, generation by generation, through 250,000 years of development. Through ice ages and plagues and wars, and the slow dawning realization that they were not alone in the universe, and that the universe did not care whether they survived. And they had survived, not through luck, not through aggression, through the simple, stubborn, generational refusal to stop building, stop learning, stop preparing for whatever came next. Verk placed his hand flat on the viewport glass. A gesture that meant, in Korath tradition, that the surface beneath the hand was claimed not as territory but as something acknowledged, something real, something that could not be dismissed. "In our records," he said, "we have a classification for systems that exceed our ability to assess. It has not been used in 190,000 years. The last time it was applied was to a stellar nursery, a natural formation of such scale and power that no civilization could claim authority over it. The classification is sovereign beyond measure." He lifted his hand from the glass. "I am updating our records. You are the first species to receive it." Marin watched his reflection in the viewport, superimposed over the planet that his ancestors had dismissed and her ancestors had built. 2 species, separated by 250,000 years of divergent history, standing in the same room for the first time. One had once been an empire and was now a remnant. The other had once been negligible and was now everything. She thought about what her grandmother would have said if she had been standing here. Her grandmother, who had spent 40 years at the Vantage Array listening to nothing, and had died believing that the universe held no one else. Her mother, who had taken over the same station, and listened to the same silence, and had once told Marin, during a quiet shift when the algorithms hummed and the stars burned and nothing changed, "The silence does not mean we are alone. It means whatever is out there has not arrived yet. And when it does, we will be ready." Marin had been 13 when her mother said that. She had not understood it then. She understood it now. "Commander," she said, "when your archivists begin transferring data to the deep archive, I would like to request access to one specific file." "Name it." "Your original survey recording. The one your team made when they walked these river valleys 270,000 years ago. Your species' first observation of ours. I want to hear what your scientists said when they looked at our ancestors and classified them as negligible." Verk regarded her for a long moment. "That recording exists. It has been preserved in our primary database as a historical artifact. I will have it transmitted to your archive as a priority item." He paused. "But I warn you, the recording is clinical, cold. A routine assessment of a species that did not matter. The scientist who made it did not pause, did not hesitate, did not wonder. He observed, classified, and moved on. "That is exactly why I want it," Marin said. "Because the distance between that recording and this moment is the measure of everything we are." The Hearthstone began its return trajectory toward Earth. The Korath fleet held position in the outer system, their battered hulls catching starlight, their ancient engines cooling for the first time in 12,000 years. Below them, the defense platforms tracked their positions with the steady, unhurried attention of sentries who had been watching for a very long time and were not surprised by what they saw. Marin returned to the vantage array 4 days later. She resumed her rotation at the deep listening station, her console now carrying 2 signal feeds instead of 1. The first was the deep space background, the same cosmic silence she had monitored for 11 years, still vast, still mostly empty, still patient. The second was the steady pulse of the Korath remnant fleet's communication signals from the outer system, a rhythm she was learning to read, a language she was learning to understand, a presence she was learning to accept as part of the landscape of her work. Her grandmother had listened to silence. Her mother had listened to silence. Marin listened to the sound of a species that had crossed 250,000 years of void and found, at the end of it, not the empty waypoint it expected, but a world that had used every one of those years to become something that could not be dismissed, deferred, or diminished. In the Deep Archives Korath section, the first data transfer from Verk's fleet was being received and catalogued. Tens of thousands of years of galactic records, star charts of regions humanity had never reached, histories of civilizations that had risen and fallen in the silence between one species' departure and another's readiness. The archivists worked through the night, not because they had to, but because the data was extraordinary, because it filled gaps in the human record that had been open for 100,000 years, because every file they opened was a window into the galaxy that their ancestors had spent 250,000 years preparing to face. And because, underneath all the preparation, underneath the defense grids and the atmospheric shields and the fleet anchorages, and the 12-tier security architecture that wrapped the planet in concentric shells of readiness, humanity had never lost the thing that the Korath survey had failed to measure. Curiosity. The same curiosity that had made a primate look up at the stars from a river valley 250,000 years ago. The same curiosity that had driven a hand to reach into orbit and pull down a beacon and spend centuries decoding its language. The same curiosity that had filled the deep archive with the records of 412 civilizations and built a section for the Korath before anyone knew whether the Korath still existed. The curiosity was still there. It had always been there. It was the thing that could not be counted, classified, or dismissed. And it was the reason that a species once catalogued as negligible now stood at the center of a system that made an empire's remnant look up in wonder and recognize, for the first time in 270,000 years, that the greatest power in the galaxy had never been the one with the most systems. It had been the one that never stopped becoming more.